All right. Hey, everyone. Thank you so much for joining me today for my talk on observability anti-patterns. I am super excited to be here. But before we get started, a little bit about me. My name is Adriana Villela, and I love tech. In a past life, I used to run DevOps and observability programs at scale. Currently, I co-host the On Call Me Maybe podcast, which you should totally check out after this. I love solving hard problems, whether it's at my day job as a senior developer advocate at Lightstep or on a Rockwall, which is where you'll find me blowing off steam when I'm not at work. So now that we've got the pleasantries out of the way, let's get started. Now, have you ever been at a place that claimed to be all in on observability, only for you to realize that, well, they're not actually following observability practices? And I've been in this space long enough to witness my fair share of anti-patterns, or what I like to refer to as crimes against observability. And today I'll be calling these out in the hopes that you can bring these learnings back to your respective organizations. But before we get started talking about observability anti-patterns, let's take a brief detour to define observability. Now, observability, or OLE or O11Y for short, lets us understand a system from the outside by letting us ask questions without knowing the inner workings of that system. Now, basically what that means is that even though you don't understand all the nitty-gritty business logic of that system, your system emits enough information for you to be able to follow the breadcrumbs to ultimately answer the question, why is this happening? And now you might be wondering, okay, but why should you care? Well, first of all, observability allows you to troubleshoot gnarly issues easily, even if you're not familiar with the code base, which means that you don't have to keep relying on your senior engineers to always go in and troubleshoot those icky issues that come up at 2 a.m. It means that you can empower your more junior folks to solve those problems as well. It also helps you answer questions about production systems, even when you don't know what the question is ahead of time. So basically, it lets you deal with novel problems. You got some weird error that you've never seen before? No problem, because if your system is properly observable, it means that you have all the information that you in your hands to be able to follow those breadcrumbs to understand why it's happening. And finally, observability gives us the power to identify issues in production before your users start screaming at you on Facebook and Twitter, which is awesome. So keeping that in mind, let's take a look at some observability anti-patterns. So high crime number 1, traces not being treated as first-class citizens. Now, too many organizations put far too much emphasis on metrics and logs, either completely disregarding or downplaying traces. And yes, metrics and logs are useful, but to a point. You see, metrics give us information about things like CPU levels and the amount of time that it takes to complete a transaction. But they can only provide aggregate information that you can't drill down into to understand what's going on with your system. And logs, on the other hand, provide us useful point-in-time information. However, by themselves, logs make it pretty damn difficult to troubleshoot because they don't give you that big picture view. So neither metrics nor logs give you enough context to understand what's happening with your system at a high level. Thus, the biggest crime against observability is committed when metrics and logs are treated as the main actors in your observability story, when in fact they should take a more supporting role. And spoiler alert, traces are the true stars of the show. So how do we fix this? Well, we take a trace-first approach. Traces give you that end-to-end system-wide view. They show you not only what's going on within services, but also across services. And then, well, where do the logs and metrics fit into this? So we make logs more useful by making them part of our overall story. So we embed them in our traces. And then we correlate our metrics to our traces. And again, we get that extra bit of context. Now on to our next problem. High crime number 2, the wall O dashboards. And honestly, this one is nails on chalkboard for me. I once worked at a place where the CTO thought that their production woes would be solved by dashboarding all the things. He went on saying, hey, I helped set up a wall of dashboards when I worked at XYZ company and it helped us so much. Yeah, but that was like 10, 15 years ago when there wasn't much else to work with. I mean, time to get with the times, buddy, and rethink that wall of dashboards. Now, does that mean that dashboards go away entirely? No, not at all. But instead, you want to rethink your dashboard situation. Use fewer dashboards. Don't rely on the wall of dashboards to guide your observability journey. A better alternative is to create dashboards from service level objectives, or SLOs, which are actionable values. So for example, suppose you have an SLO that states that the response time for a given service must be 95% of the time. If the service isn't meeting that threshold, that SLO, it triggers an alert by notifying Slack, phone, pager, passenger pigeon, whatever, to tell your on-call engineers that your system is not behaving within the expected parameters and that you've got to take a closer look at things. Now, this is way better than staring at a bunch of dashboards, isn't it? And as an aside, if you're interested in SLOs, Alex Hidalgo has a great book on the topic. Now, high crime number 3, engineers not instrumenting their own code. Now, I worked at an organization where I ran an observability practices team. And our mission was to establish and disseminate observability across the organization. Now, part of that involved us teaching teams how to instrument their own code with OpenTelemetry. Now, OpenTelemetry, or OTel, is a vendor-neutral framework for instrumenting code, and it is the de facto standard for instrumentation adopted by all of the major observability vendors. Now, unfortunately, while leadership was all in on OpenTelemetry, they wanted my engineers to instrument code that they weren't even working on. Now, what's wrong with this picture? Well, for starters, my engineers didn't write the code. The dev team did. And just like it would be super weird to have someone comment your code and write your unit tests for you, then why would it be okay to have somebody instrument your code? I mean, how exactly do you expect them to know what's worth instrumenting? Now, listen, if you're just getting started with observability on an existing code base, you are basically starting from zero. You will have to go through your code to instrument it, and you may have to put some features on hold in order to focus on this. And this will take time, but it will be worth it in the future. Now, if you're looking for a quick win, identify those high-touch areas that you need to instrument and go from there. And also get in the habit of instrumenting new code as you write it so that you don't have to go back and instrument later. And as a rule of thumb, focus on instrumenting your homegrown frameworks and libraries, as that will give you maximum coverage of instrumentation as far as tracing is concerned. The moral of the story is, as leaders, foster a culture of engineers instrumenting their own damn code. High crime number 4, belief that observability and observability tooling are the same thing. Now, this couldn't be farther from the truth. Observability is a set of practices supported by tools. And these practices include instrumenting your code properly so you have enough information to be able to troubleshoot issues when they arise. So you don't have to bring in that group of well-seasoned experts. You can rely on your junior crew because they too have all the information they need to troubleshoot. Treating traces as first-class citizens. Keeping an eye on the health of your system after you release it into production. It is absolute nonsense to deploy something into production and pray that it's going to work. Once you deploy something into production, keep an eye on it to see how it acts in the wild. You are doing yourself a great disservice if you don't do that. And finally, creating meaningful alerts based on those service level objectives that I mentioned earlier. And if you put that into place, you've got yourself some observability. And finally, high crime number 5, which is what I like to call observability theater. Now, we've seen it all before, companies going all in on so-called digital transformations, which of course includes going agile and creating a DevOps practice, which are all noble causes and the intentions are good. But sometimes and oftentimes, folks end up being blocked by a group of people who either never believed that it would work or never wanted it to work in the first place. And I should know, been there, done that, bought the t-shirt. In short, it was all theater. And I've seen that with observability too. hey, we need observability, woohoo! But then it turns out that it's a front for Lando logs and Wall-O metrics dashboards because that's what folks grew up with and that's all they want to know. Now, as executives, I beg of you to open your mind to the paradigm shift of observability. If you've been around the block on these types of big initiatives before, as I have, you know that the change can't and won't happen without buy-in from the executive level and from individual contributors alike. So be part of that positive change. Now, like all worthwhile things, achieving observability greatness isn't an overnight thing. But if you keep the following things in mind, it will help guide you on your observability journey. First, make traces a first-class citizen in your observability landscape. Secondly, say bye to the wall of dashboards and hello to alert-based SLOs. Encourage your developers to instrument their own code. Treat observability as a set of practices supported by tools. Sort your practices out before reaching out for the shiny new thing. I promise it'll be worth it. And finally, just say no to observability theater. Thanks for sticking around. And if you have questions or would like to talk about any of the topics that I've covered today, hit me up on either Twitter, Mastodon, or LinkedIn. Peace, love, and code.